Today we're going to be doing the painting for our fundraiser project, and we're starting with just the basic color for this part. I'm not going to do any pattern work today. I'm going to wait and get out our colored markers next time and use the colored markers to create my pattern. So today I'm just going to lay down some basic color to get us started. The first thing you want to do when you start painting with watercolors is, of course, you're going to need to choose a couple of brushes. Get your materials ready. You're going to need a couple of brushes. I've got my red flat ones. These are great for straight edges. These are also good for any tiny corners. You might want to push the edge of the paintbrush into those tiny corners. Then I have my green round brushes, and these are good for curves. So we're going to use both brushes today, and you might need to change a couple of times on your painting depending on how you drew. And we're going to use those brushes to lay down our color. I've got my water bucket ready. I've got my good paint tray ready. And the first thing I need to decide is what shape I'm going to start with. The first one I want to start with today is the middle of the cup right here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my big flat brush. And to get the paints to work, you need to have a really wet brush. So you're going to wipe it gently on the sides just to get the extra water off. And then you have to make your color choice. And I'm going to start with red for my color choice. And I'm going to go ahead and start painting here. And this is just wet paint on dry paper, and that'll be just fine for our project. There are a couple of things you want to keep in mind when you're painting with the watercolor paints. First of all, your brush has to stay wet while you're using the paints. Otherwise, if it gets too dry, then what happens is you get sticky paint. And if your brush is starting to stick to your painting, that is a problem. So you don't want that to happen while you're painting today. You want to have a nice wet brush that's just going to glide smoothly over your paper and is not going to get stuck to it. You might have to keep going back to the water bucket and getting more water on your brush, and that's all fine. It's hard to get too much water on your paper. You'd have to really be working hard at it in order for that to happen. All right, so once I've got this painted, this shape painted, I'm going to clean my brush and choose another color. And the next shape I'm going to paint needs to be a shape that is not touching the red shape now. The reason I don't want to have a shape like maybe the table painted second is because if this paint is still wet and I paint this one, the colors I might blend together like this, and I don't want that in my painting. It's going to be too confusing if that happens. So what I'm going to do is choose a shape that is not touching any side of this red shape right here. Well, the handle's touching here, so I can't do that. The oval's touching here, so I can't do that. The background is touching on the side, so I'm going to leave that alone. The saucer is touching on the sides. I'm going to leave that alone. The frame, however, is not touching any part of that. So that's going to be the next shape I'm going to paint. And for that, I think I'm going to go with my flat red brush again. I'm going to go ahead and get it wet, make sure it's all clean, wipe it off gently, and choose my color. I think I want a brown frame for this, just a traditional kind of wooden looking frame. It's going to be a nice brown color. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to paint this. Stay inside your lines as best you can. That's going to make it look the best. If you accidentally get some paint on the table, I'm not too concerned about that. We'll just use the sponges for cleanup today, and that'll help get that off. Of course, don't paint the table on purpose. That's not the purpose of our paints today. And I'm going to turn my paper here so I can go ahead and do the next sides. That just makes it a little bit easier for me to paint if I'm not trying to stretch over wet paint and drag my hand through it. So I'm going to go and do all my sides. All right, there's two done. Turn my paper, keep my brush nice and wet. Now while I'm painting this frame, the red that I painted earlier is drying, and it won't take very long for it to get mostly dry to the point where I can go ahead and paint another shape that is touching it. So as soon as I'm done with the brown, I think I can probably go on to something touching that red. But of course I'm going to look for something that's not going to be touching the brown, so I'm going to have to stop and think what would be a shape that I could paint that's not going to be touching now the brown frame that's going to be wet and drying while I paint the next shape. Okay, so there we got my frame all painted. I'm going to clean my brush off. And the next shape I think I'm going to work on is going to be my oval. My oval is not touching any of the brown, and I can go ahead and paint that. I think I'm going to go with maybe some purple. This one is my purple. I'll go some purple on my saucer here. This is that oval shape down here. Now that red still might be wet, so I'm not going to get too close. I'm going to try and avoid those colors blending into each other. And in this way, you're going to continue on with your painting, and you're going to do all of your shapes today. So I would need to do the top oval shape, my handle shape, my table, and my background shape. And you want to watch when you're doing those table and background shapes. There are a couple of sneaky shapes in there that you want to watch out for. Sometimes these shapes sneak up on us. People don't realize that they're actually something that needs to be painted, or not really quite clear which shape it is and what color it ought to be. So we want to make sure those match so we'd have no confusion when people are looking at your painting. All right, so there's my purple saucer. I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush off, wipe it off gently, and set that down. Now if I take a look here, if I'm going to do, say, my background next, my background's going to have many shapes to it. So it's got this shape as a background shape, this shape in between my steam as a background shape, this shape on the side is a background shape, and so is this tiny little shape right here. All of these shapes belong to the background color. I'm not going to paint my steam today because I want that to be white, so I'm going to leave that the white of my paper and go over it with the colored markers next time. So I think I would choose maybe orange. I'm going to get my big round brush out again. I'm going to choose orange for the background. I'm going to take my orange, and all of this is now going to be orange. And I would paint this in a better way. I just want to show you what shapes they're going to be orange. That shape's going to be orange. This shape in between the steam is going to be orange. This shape over here is going to be orange, and so is this tiny shape right here. This is also background orange color. So once I know what I'm supposed to be painting, I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to work on these areas right here. Now that brown is still really wet, so I might come and do that brown edge last. And I'm just going to push the paint around in those other spots until I get to that. There we go. I've got some red spreading into my orange. If that happens to you, take a piece of paper towel and you can dry it off really quickly and it won't spread too badly. So I'm going to dry off some of that red and orange. There we go. And then I can push that paint a little bit further into that corner. Clean that up a bit. There we go. Push that over. Clean that up. I don't want that to happen in my brown too, and I can see it's still wet right here. So I'm just going to let this edge dry for just a moment. Let that work on drying, and then I'll come back and work on those last little bit of white spots there. I don't want to leave it. I do want to go ahead and paint it. I just don't want to paint it quite yet. And this is the way you're going to proceed for all the rest of your painting. You want to make sure you paint the background, you paint the inside of your cup, you paint your handle, and you paint all of the spaces of your table. And that's the demonstration for today.